On behalf of the Training Centre and all of our directors, I'd like to welcome you here today to our seminar on hydrogen safety, presented by Billy Chan and John Meunier. So before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the Bedegal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we stand. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us here today. So before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. Firstly, I note for our viewers joining online, if you don't mind, could you please mute your microphone? If you have any questions throughout the seminar, please feel free to type them into the chat and we'll try our best to get through them at the end during our Q&A. And also just to note that this session will be recorded. So without further ado, I'd like to proudly introduce our speakers today. We're very lucky to have Billy Chan, Senior Engineer at BOC Linde, and John Meunier, Engagement Manager at Standards Australia. So just a short bio for Billy. Billy is a chartered chemical engineer with 25 plus years experience providing technical leadership for the innovation, design and safety of gas products, gas plants and manufacturing processes at BOC Linde. Billy is a member of Standards Australia Technical Committee, ME93, and the convener of Working Group 10, Production, Storage and Handling, that is working to mirror the international standards for hydrogen technologies and build the connections with community, infrastructure developers and regulatory bodies. Billy was a member of Dr. Alan Finkel's Stakeholder Advisory Panel, informing the development of a national hydrogen strategy supported by Australian energy ministers. So welcome, Billy. Before we get started, I'll also do a quick biography for John, of course. So John Meunier is an engagement manager at Standards Australia with over 16 years of client service experience in the UK and Australian markets. His remit at Standards Australia sees him act as the lead across energy, electro technology, oil and gas and mining sectors. Within his portfolio, John oversees several strategic projects across renewable energy, distributed energy, resource integration, electric vehicles, renewable natural gas, and biofuels. John manages proposals for all standard development projects within these sectors, ensuring all projects contribute to the net benefit of the Australian community. Standards Australia is the nation's peak non-government standards organisation. So welcome to John as well. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Billy to kick us off today.
I think before I start, thank you for the introduction and also, take myself and John around the laboratory. I can see, lots of fantastic R&D and thinking about the blue sky research here, which is fantastic. I think that will bring a lot of benefits to wider community here, and also, personal congratulations to in your PhD. Okay. Again, thanks for having opportunities to speak, on this occasion.
I guess before I begin this brief talk, I probably just need to, give you a little bit of my background. My training way back in the 80s. I'm a chemical engineer, and since then I'm still practicing chemical engineering. I have a few years starting off my career in the food industry, food processing. Since then, over nearly 30 years, very much in the gas industry, and I come across, many project development. In my early days, I built plants, gas plant in particularly, commissioning plant, and nowadays I'm very much, operation support, and safety is part of my, part of my portfolio. Perhaps I think the reason why, I together with John to talk about, I guess I have two roles at Standard Australia. And I'm serving as the chair of the gas cylinder operation, the ME2, as well as I'm serving as the convener of one of the working group of the ME93, which is hydrogen technologies. as I say, hygiene safety or safety in general is a very big topic. So perhaps today I just touch on a few things. I try to put it in three parts, three small parts. First, I would touch on hygiene safety. I talk about the perception versus the reality. I probably would disappoint you if you are thinking of every time have a hygiene safety presentation, you will see a Hindenburg airships. I would disappoint you this time. I'm not going to show that photos. And briefly, talk about the reality check. I mean, what do we mean by knowledge, experience, and such and such. The second part, I briefly talk about acknowledging the safety challenges in hygiene production, storage, and handling or transportations. Now, because I also have my role serving the ME2, it's more about the gas cylinder or gas storage. So I just pick the storage as a talking point, and I know that you guys having a lot of good development or R&D in productions and the third part, which is the most important part, basically a warming up for John to talk about. I briefly would touch on like the standard development and adoption process, and start with the hygiene value chain, and then to show you a few photos about who's behind the engine room, basically. Now, I know you guys are very experienced and a lot of knowledge. Perhaps just to ensure you can listen to this presentation from the start to the end. I perhaps will start with a quiz. Just 3 questions. You don't need to give me the answer, but you think about the question and then keep the answer for yourself. There will be no prize, but there's also no penalties. Interesting enough, hygiene on the periodic table, the atomic number 1, sometimes is quite confusing and deceiving, put it this way. In fact, what we learned, well, depending on which history book you read, in fact, it's not the first element we discover. Now, the question is, how many elements discovered before the discovery of hygiene in 1766? As you can see on the screen, there are 3 answers. Pick the one you think is right. Okay, now second questions. There are 3 gases. From the current knowledge, we know that will have the negative Joule-Thomson effect at normal temperature and pressure condition, of course. So hydrogen, helium, and what is the third one? All right, so far so good. Let me move on to the question number 3. Now, hydrogen can exist as a gas, liquid, / solid, and arguably, plasma. And when you're dealing with hydrogen and talking about hydrogen safety, often we need to know, I mean, not just hydrogen, in general, all the chemicals we're dealing with. I think that normally the starting point is to look up, which UN number the gas or the chemicals we're dealing with. Now, would you know or would you remember the UN number of gaseous hydrogen and the liquid hydrogen? So, pick the choice, A, B, or C. Okay. Well, you don't need to tell me the answer, but normally I can read from your face. I know you got it. Yes, no. Right or wrong at the end of the presentation. Now, okay, let's start with the part 1, hydrogen safety, perception versus reality. Now, the reason I put this photo is that sometimes if you look at the mirror, depending on how close to the mirror and depending on what sort of mirror, a basic mirror, convex mirror or concave mirror, the reflection actually is quite different from where you are and how close to the reflection point. Now, safety. I mean, I'm using a mirror as an analogies. If the risk or the is high, but if you look through the mirror, having the reflection is not that high, you probably underestimate the unsafe practice or unsafe situation you are being in. On the other hand, if you are seeing a mirror having a reflection much more larger than the real risk you are dealing with, potentially put it in a dollar term, you probably will over-engineering, and you probably need to spend a lot of money in the area you not really need to do that. So I guess, the perception and reality, this is a good check we always have. The other way to look at, the reality check, I'm using a, I know it's, quite a number of academic here, so I just pick a couple of the paper published not too long ago. One paper published is a Japanese publication. Hydrogen becoming very topical and getting a lot of media and attention these days. But if you're comparing the global scale or the global trend, Australia actually a little bit behind. Allow me to say, we are probably a decade behind, the Europe, a decade behind, in US. I just pick a Japanese publication as an example, because almost 10 or 15 years ago, Japan identified, they need to transition to a low carbon or low emission economy. So they start looking into, utilizing hydrogen as a vector, energy vectors. So the screen, I just take a couple of the snapshot. The first snapshot, number one, once you have more education program going on in the school, at universities, you can actually promote and people are more realize, the safety. Now the snapshot one basically telling, trying to get some understanding, a sense of, people, how they see hydrogen as an energy carrier. Now there's a survey conducted in 2008 and also 2015. As you can tell, the more education program going on, even in the general public, there will be more receptive of using hydrogen as energy. Now again, when I look at the statistic, the sample size is not that great from the survey, but I think the trend is there. But just be careful, reading any statistic. If you look at the last questions, interesting, you will find there are 3.5% of the respondent not even think of electricity as an energy. So sometimes we just need to be careful, reading the data. The other snapshot from the paper, which is the knowledge of the hydrogen properties in Japan, trying to get the sense of people understanding the hydrogen property, and as the times go by and the knowledge been there's a good trend put in this way. I understand there will be the latest version coming along, so I might give it a read too. Now, as a start, the part one talking about the reality check. There's also another good paper by Tasmanian, the university. They're looking at how getting the safety or getting the message across to the general public. I think, in a very nutshell, if you want to get something across, we need to consider the socio-political acceptance, community acceptance, and market acceptance. I mean, all combined together, which will get a clear message across. And in order to do that, government have a great role to play, which is to come up with this very solid regulations. From industrial perspective, we also have the role to play, such as the code of practice, and don't forget international standard as well as the Australian standard also have the big role to play, as a balance. So I guess Standard Australia play a very important role in that sense. So that basically touch on the reality and the check. I guess to summarize part one. Back in my school days, we quite often using the phrase like knowledge is king. So everyone try to seek for knowledge, read more books, and but is that enough today? I mean, knowledge, you can get a lot of knowledge from Google. Once you Google, you can get a lot of knowledge. So I suppose having that sort of conversation, just like asking people, which book you haven't read, it opened up a vast question mark. I guess today we also need to consider not just the knowledge, but also the experience. So I'm suggesting, knowledge plus experience, and this is why industry and research, institutions and the international and Australian standards can come together and fill in the gap of the knowledge and experience. Now I take you to my second part. The second part, again, this is a big topic. The graph, sort of the sketch or the graph, depending on how you consider it, is coming from a paper which is published, I think, almost 20 years ago now. Maybe not that old, but probably old enough in that sense. It put a picture of, if we are talking about like low emission transmission or transitioning from carbon economy to hydrogen economy, we need to start somewhere. And as you can read from the graph, there's a lot of story in the graph, but I suggest just looking at the dotted line, the vertical line. We suppose the transitioning is happening, well, already happening, but now where we are and how we're doing, and I think that, there's still a big room for improvement. As I said earlier, I briefly would touch on the storage and perhaps a little bit of transport fundamentals. If we are talking about hydrogen, production is very key aspect of the whole supply chain or value chain. But storage is also a big part. When you have produced gases such as hydrogen, you need to store somewhere, and then you need to store in the right form for the right moment, for the right use. On these slides, on the left-hand side, you can see there's a physical based such as storage hydrogen in compressed gas cylinder or the gas container. Liquid hydrogen, it's becoming more popular, but again, sometimes you just need to balance the pros and cons by each means. The cryo-compressed perhaps can be a good alternative. So this is very much about a physical base. Material base, it opened up a complete world. I know that a lot of researchers actually working on the material base, and the graphical representation, I basically take it from the DOE, the US website. Now on the right hand side, it's a very simplified graph. Plot the gravimetric density of hydrogen versus the pressures. As just to give you a sense of, if you are, typically, for example, if you see a gas cylinder holding, 150 bar, 200 bar, comparing to the liquid hydrogen, can hold much more higher density. Now today, I think I have a slide later on give you a sense of what sort of technologies today we use to holding hydrogen in a much more high pressure. Now, not everyone know the history of a gas cylinder or gas storage. So I thought I'd give you a very quick timeline of the gas storage. Now, this timeline basically through my many discussion and correspondence with a former BOC technical authority. He based in England, and you know, throughout the conversation and correspondence, that's very much a quick timeline of the gas storage development. Now, again, depending on which history book you read, picking a point, you know, 1852, some people would consider this is a, you know, at the close of the second phase of the industrial revolutions in UK. It sounds about right. And at that time, the two gases becoming more commonly used for the general public. One is oxygen by thermal decomposition of barium oxide, and then for medical use and for a lot of other oxidation use at that time. The other gas at that time, which is the acetylene. And today we're still, the majority of the acetylene production, we're still utilizing the same technology, which is interesting enough. You are putting calcium carbide deep into water, and then the bubble up through, and then you get the acetylene. So having an on-site or on-the-spot generation, which is great, but then how you're going to bring the gas to a, to operation theaters or to the, to the work taking place is far away from, the productions. So around that time, gas storage and, becoming, very much from the needs to very much a want product. So, you know what? The skill on, putting the copper or copper alloy at that time is quite mature. So the first gas storage, interesting enough, is mailing a numbers of the copper spheres and then putting together and then becoming like a gas storage, which the photo on the top, copper sphere for auction, 1852. That so far we consider is the first gas storage or a proper gas storage. The pressure is, the storage pressure is not that high. It's around about 10 to 15 bar at that time, but it's very innovative. Now today you see, in a laboratory or in, you see the gas cylinder. Today shape actually is not too different comparing to the first patent gas cylinder, which back in the, I think back in the days, 1866, is a Lane and Taunton. They developed the first steel gas cylinder. The shape remain as it is today. Excuse me. There are three technology or three ways to make a gas cylinders even till now. The first patent, Lane and Taunton, they're using the technology is to form a cylinder from a plate, a steel plate, by having a circular plate and then just to press and form it. And back in the days, there's not much about heat treatment or conditioning. So when it formed, that's very much it was. So the holding pressure is not that high. But today, we commonly using the plate forming is still a way to make a gas cylinder, but there's two other ways to make a good gas cylinders, which is one way is what we call about billet pressing process, having an ingot and then, having a punches and then to punch through the metal and then form a gas cylinder. But of course, the making the base and the, and the shoulder and the neck, of course, need a lot more technique into it. And the other way to make gas cylinder is basically formed by a tube. So it's a precast tube, and then trim into the right length and then to form it. Now the technologies doesn't change that much. Still rely on the what we call the three common pathway. But the utilizing of the alloy, the control of the heat treatment process, make today's gas cylinders, the strength and much more higher. And at the bottom of there are 3 or 4 ISO standard. Today, if you're talking about a gas cylinder, most likely this is coming from the ISO 9809. If this is an aluminum alloy cylinder, likely it's a the 7X66. And then if you are thinking about the long and big water capacity tubes, they're likely in ISO terminology, which is the ISO 111 and 20. As the timeline go by, I mean, each dot actually have his own story. I would not bore you at this much, but I'm just to give you a sense of today the gas cylinder, in addition to what we call the type 1 metallic formations, we in the circulation there's a different type, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. Okay, again, just to give you a quick overview of what we're talking about. If people talking about gas cylinder, they will use the terminologies, type 1, type 2, 3, 4, and even 5. Now today, type 1 is the metallic, which I already showed you in my previous slides. Now type 2, in addition to a metallic liner, there is utilizing the composite material, what we call the hoop wrapped. And type 3, a little bit more complex. Instead of, in addition to the hoop wrap, they will be overwrapped, all the way to the, to the end of the cylinder. And type 3 is still relying on the metal as a gas membrane. For those people, working in the hydrogen embrittlement, I think that, you will appreciate, what kind of metal and what kind of the metal surface conditions to make it less hydrogen embrittlement prone. Now, type 4 becoming more popular. When I say more popular, because that comes down to the weight ratio. How much gas you can having in that container, comparing to the gross weight of the gas package. Type 4, the only metallic parts, typically they're the 2 lumps of the metal, on the inlet or the outlet, or depending on how you visualize that container. The rest of the gas cylinder type 4, the gas membrane is also a polymer, a different type of plastic, and then the pressure retaining is all held by composite material. Typically, as you can tell from the slides, in the early development, people were using the glass fiber a lot, but we also learned that glass fiber it can potentially take up the moisture and then weaken the structures. So the other line of development using the composite material is the aramid. It's the same material, for making the bulletproof vest, for example. Now today, carbon fiber becoming more popular and popular. If you're talking about a decade ago, the cost of the carbon fiber are very, still very dear. But comparing today, they're much more affordable. There's also a very rough graph on the right top corner, and give you a sense of from the very early days, the ratio of the gas to the gross weight of the gas package, today, by looking at the graph, you can tell, how advanced we are. Now, that probably get down to too deep, so I'll just keep it brief. Now, when we're talking about storage, now the storage can be in the form of the pure storage. So it can be, a storage in the backyard of the production, or storage in the isolation, or storage in somewhere else. So purely as a storage. But often the storage can be a static storage or the buffer storage. And if we come to that, you can still using the gas cylinder pathway as a buffer storage or static storage. But again, that's probably not as good as, when you have the design storage to the pressure vessel. I just, give you a sense of how vast Australian standard can be, referenced to when you come to, designing which path or which pathway to go. A photo can tell 1,000 words. So, I just, show you a few photos of, static storage, transportable storage. And again, I just give you, a couple of reference of the Australian standard, such as, the 2030 family and the AS2337 family. All these are associated, related to, from design registration, design, and how you maintain a cylinder, according to the regulation. And by the way, some of the Australian standard are actually written into the regulation. They're either in the WHS or OHS regulations. So when a standard written in the regulation becoming part of the, the legislation or law. So this is why, how important we need to get the standard right. Again, more photos, and perhaps this photo, I'll just give you a quick comparison. The beauty or the benefits having a liquid storage comparing to the gas storage. As a rule of thumb, we're talking about 4 times of the footprint difference. But again, to maintaining the liquid storage, requiring, firstly, when you make the liquid, it's more energy intensive, and when you're keeping the liquid in the storage, also requiring, a lot more effort than the gas storage, relatively. But again, just to give you a sense of the difference. Okay, I promise I'm not going to sell you anything, but just show you some photos. Now, in transportable, today you can probably still, some gas company using the tube trailers, getting the a large quantity of gas from A to B. I think in a few years' time, you probably will see more often this sort of arrangement, MUGC, or a multiple element gas container. They probably will, mount the gas container in a vertical rather than horizontals, mounting different configurations, and you probably will see, more type 3 or type 4 in the circulations. Well, I know that quite a lot of people working in the hydrogen embrittlement from the industrial learning to us, it's not new, but it's not really new. We start off operating the gas storage all the way back to even the last century. But hydrogen embrittlement, a good understanding. I'm not talking about in the academic area. I'm talking about in the industrial sense. Well, we only learned that sort of in the mid 70s when we're trying to charge more gas into a gas cylinder or gas tube, and then well, unfortunately there's some fatal incidents at that time, and the more we dig into it, the more understanding of the hydrogen embrittlement. I guess to us, what we learned, I think some key learning. I think the tightness. Now the tightness as we all know, hydrogen being the smallest molecule, it can actually, slip through a very small passage. In addition, it actually can absorb onto, the metal, so it's quite easily. As a gas storage, there's one part we often not pay too much attention. We understand the metallic characteristic related to hydrogen reasonably well. I think it's potentially advanced, comparing to the time the learning in the 70s. But now sometimes the challenge is not the metallic. In fact, it's the non-metallic. Dealing with the O-ring, to correct the specification of the O-rings, the sizing of the material, the tolerance, all these non-metallic element are a big part of what we call the tightness integrity assessment. As we know, if we have the leak, no matter how small or big, potentially it can lead to defect or detonations. On the next slide, I will show you a couple of photos. So don't underestimate even a small leak or particular venting design. The third point, the surface finish. Today, I mean, to some people, hydrogen is hydrogen. Doesn't make much difference, talking about different grade of the hydrogen. I'm talking, I'm not talking about the color, the source of the origin of hydrogen. I'm talking about, a different specification of the hydrogen for different use. For example, if you want to have the hydrogen used for a PEM, the PEM fuel cell, and the quality of the hydrogen is very important. In fact, not just the quality. The most killing part is the impurity. So, I mean, just give you an example. I mean, today we talk about a catalyst in the morning. The catalyst poisoning or poisoning of the PM, like for example, hydrogen sulfide, CO, and ammonia. Those are three, chemicals can poison a fuel cell in the time frame of months, rather than years. So the way you control the impurity is very important, and the condition of the storage, the internal condition of the storage, is the big part of it. If you start with a very crappy surface, and don't expect don't expect you have a very good quality coming out from from that sort of storage. Well, I know we have expert here in hydrogen embrittlement. I think I just briefly touch on what we know and from industry perspective. Now there are a number of the ISO publications by the technical committee, the ISO technical committee 58, and in fact the whole family has been adopted by the Australian standard. Is part of the ME2 adoptions. If you can remember the long name, it's ISO 11114. Now there's 6 parts, and every part carry its own weight. For example, part 1 is metallic, part 2 is non-metallic, part 3 is probably not related to hydrogen, it's oxygen compatibility. Part 4 becoming more, is the hydrogen embrittlement testing and verifications. Part 5 and part 6, those are the evaluation of the non-metallic, substance. There are some good reference material from EIGA. EIGA is stand for European Industrial Gas Associations. There's some very good publication from EIGA. If you want to start somewhere, that's probably the good place to start with. Now, when we talk about safety, we talk about leak. I'm sure you're probably aware of this the QRA. And if you have a good detections, if you have, well, firstly, I think the better approach to hydrogen safety or safety in general, we should focus on the preventive rather than the mitigative. But if considered a mitigative way, if we have a leak, and better to have something to detect the leak. And if you can control and isolate, then you're okay. Then nothing to worry about. If the leak continue and not detected in time and adequately, potentially it will give you a and if you have ignitions around, that potentially will give you a jet fire. I have an example of the jet fire later on. I can show it to you. If the leak, not got delayed or accumulate in certain environment, potentially it can lead to explosion if an ignition source nearby or in the vicinity. Now, there are two photos on this slide. One photo's basically telling you hydrogen or the vent, even in a very low pressure. The gas doesn't like take corners. The straightest distance, the most easier way to let it go is the better way to go. This is one of the example. Perhaps the estates for this facility is very dear, and they're trying to maintain the vent line, and then in one area they actually put a big 90-degree bend, even venting a low pressure hydrogen. Potentially that's what you expect to see. I'm not saying that's a must happening in this way, but potentially this might be the way you can see. Now the photo on the bottom, this is again a venting. Excuse me. Now let me declare this is not exactly the hydrogen deflect example. In fact, there are two gases on the hazardous book under the 2C. One is the hydrogen and the other one is the acetylene. The photo at the bottom basically is a venting of acetylene, and not consider the free venting enough, creating a back of the back pressure and then becoming a deflect. This is a good deflect. The deflect are not completely open up. It gives you a pattern like this. This is from a vent line. You might not engage in a lot of the venting design, but I just want to show you some example. There's a number of ways to make it better, and I mean, considering in the laboratory condition, you're not venting a lot and not very frequent, but in the industrial scale, or the venting for for example, the hydrogen refueling stations, all this we need to take into consideration. And again, there's a tiny reference at the bottom. It's from a CGA 5.5, hydrogen vent system. There's also a EIGA document I referred earlier, give you a good design guidelines for venting. For people who might involved in in the hydrogen design, those are good material to start with. Now, again, instead of put up another airship Hindenburg photos, I think I just share with you 3 incidents. The first one, well, okay, let me start with hydrogen fire. I'm sure you read from the literature, saying there's no question about hydrogen flame is invisible. But what do we mean by invisible? And in fact, if under the daylight, it's hard to tell and hard to see. But if you have the dark background with less UV as a background, you can actually see the hydrogen flame. And I remember when I was a young engineer, my first hydrogen plant, when I built my first hydrogen plant, 1993, as a young engineer, we receive a lot of coaching and from the experienced engineer. And at the point of the commissioning of the the compressor, bringing the gas to the 300 bar, and then pass through a deoxo, to treat the oxygen in the hydrogen. I was given a, I don't know whether we can still get it, the coconut broom, and a very experienced engineer passed that coconut broom to me, and then he said, "Yeah, this is what you need." I didn't realize until I experienced my first hydrogen flame on top of the deoxo. And in fact, the deoxo is quite high. So when I walk closer to the deoxo, I feel a bit of the rain, a bit of the droplet on my head. That, in fact, is the product of the hydrogen flame. Now, the photo on the right, which is a clip, now it's showing one of the pressure safety relief valve operate, which is the right things you would expect a safety relief valve to operate. Now you can see, how intense the jet fire can come from, the valve out, the PSV outlet. Now I can make a joke. If this is in Australia, you probably don't see that, but this is actually in UK. In the northern part of the UK, under daylight. Remember I talked about, hydrogen flame are highly invisible in the daylight. But in UK, I think that is one of the, the summer, the winter time in UK, and in fact, it's the northern England. So I guess the background, a bit of the dark background helped. Yeah, again, there's quite a number of sort of common practice. I don't think I need to go through one by one. Excuse me. The other very common, I share with you. The other common, I probably mix up with the number. Anyway, common of the leak or the uncontrolled release of hydrogen. Whether on the hydrogen cylinder, on a pack, or on the tube trailer, there are commonly there are two types of safety relief. One is the burst test, and some are relying on the fusible plug, and those needs to be maintained, and those needs to be maintained in a very good form. If you not maintain it well, it potentially can give you a good leak point. I think I don't know whether you come across or be aware of. There was a incident in Norway, not too far away from Oslo. There was I can't remember the first or second hydrogen refueling stations. Luckily, not in a very busy area. But what happened was they have a large water capacity storage, and then there was a leak coming out from one storage, and then leading to a jet fire, and because the big storage, the gas itself passed through a very, very tiny passage, creating quite a bit of heat, and then the heat is sufficient, creating like an ignition point, and at that time generate a jet fire. Okay, now so far there's a lot of communication going on after the jet fire, but I guess in a very simple way to describe what we learned from industry, those tubes, because they want to allow a bigger passage of the hydrogen, to go in and coming out. So they create what they call a double flange arrangement. What happened was when people specifying the outer flange, which suppose held by the two, well, more than two, symbolically two blue screw. They actually got a multiple, screw. I think something like 24. The designer or the installer forgot about the nominated torque. So when they torque it up, not torque it to the right strength or the right torque. So that create that when you use the gas more often or more frequent, letting the gas in and out, it becoming a loose point, and then it becoming bigger and bigger, and then the gas actually leaks through between the inner flange and the outer flange. So what we learned so far, Currently, there are 3 different design sort of globally. There's a Korean design, North America and European design. And I think today what we learned, nominating the talk in the design and application during the installation, as well as the verification, becoming part of the verification and check and balance, and hopefully that will fix what we learned. That probably summarize my second part, which is the gas storage. Now, there's a lot about gas storage. Not just the hydrogen gas. I mean, for other gas, I think what we learned. They are good standard, or whether in ISO or in Australian standards, they're good reference material available. So before you start, before you work on a process flow diagram, process flow sheet, or before you get through every stage of the project, no matter how small, lab scale, pilot scale, or even a big scale, the good way is to look up, any relevant Australian standard or international standard. Look up any good code of practice, and also, you need to cross-check. I mean, when you're down to the risk assessment process, you need to cross-check the, all the regulation, and so I mean, there's no one way to do a good project, but as a starting point, Australian standard or ISO standard, they're good reference material. Now, my last part, standard development and adoption. I probably will keep it very short, and I know that John will already line up to bring you guys all the bolts and nuts of the standard development. Just to give you the sense of why standard, whether Australian standard or ISO standard, are very important. When we're talking about the hydrogen value chain, and you can see as a big picture, from production, processing, distribution and storage, down to the the applications, and the end use. The end use can be not the industrial people as the end use. It can be like when we blend hydrogen or using 100% of hydrogen at the fuel gas. They're strongly associated with the domestic environment. So the end user can be like the mums and dads working in the kitchens. So all this it cover a very big wide spectrum, different user, and so standard can play a very big part of keeping us, when I say us, is including the community, safe. Now, as a start, I talk about I've been serving 2 technical committee, as well as other committee in the gas association. And one of the committee, also very closely associated with John, is the ME93. We have our chair, chairing the committee as well as the working group, and get down to the next level of the work. For example, developing the Australian standard or adoption of the ISO standard, IEC standard. I will mention a little bit later on. We divided ourselves into 5 working groups. I am serving as a convener, so working group, production, storage, and handling. So there are 4 other people that are looking after each working group. As you can appreciate, we have quite a big portfolio, and in addition to the general, health and safety matters, there's a whole lot of other things. I think John will talk about the ME93 already been operating for almost 3 years, and since last year there has been a refresh, and trying to get the particular working group people are more focused on on the portfolio or development. Now one of the reasons, there are plenty of reasons why we need to have a strong working group and a committee of the ME93. Now, get down to it. We, as I mentioned, we are a little bit behind, our peers in Japan, Korea, a little bit behind from, from the European as well as the North America. So as a start, our main objective is trying to mirror the publication as well as the participation of the ISO TC197, which is the hydrogen technologies. In addition, when we plan ahead for shipping or export of the liquid hydrogen, we also have a very small presence or liaison or participation with another ISO technical committee, the TCX subcommittee 2. This is about the liquid, preparing ourselves to have the adequate liquid arm. For example, when we ship the LNG or LPG from a big ship onshore and offshore, there's one important part which is the liquid arm as a transfer. Now, today when we talk about hydrogen, we also heavily involved in different technologies such as fuel cells, such as other electrochemistry technologies. One part of the ME93 is the mirroring the IEC TC105 as a start. There are other committee we also consider, but again, as a start, we are mirroring the TC105, which is fuel cell technology. Now, in a very big picture, excuse me. Now, there's a lot of work, from a standard a committee portfolio or a standard perspective we can do, and some we cannot. Is outside our scope. But again, the message here is when we develop a standard or adoption of the international standards, what we're trying to do is focus is on the complement, not to duplicate. For example, we have to liaison. I mean, taking ME2, the gas cylinder, as a good example. My left hand need to liaise my right hand because I'm in the both community. That's having an analogies. The member in the in the main committee in the working group also need to liaison with other technical committee within the Standard Australia or other gas associations. And once we identify the way, we're trying to collaborate and cooperate. So as I said, focus is complement, not to duplicate. Now, when I put this together, today is a little bit old because there are more propagations going on. So just to give you a feel of the propagation through the ME93 so far. Excuse me. Now, when actually doing the work, you need the real people. Rather than just myself to talk about how good ME93 is, I just show you some photos of these are the people behind what I call is the engine room driving. But having said that, there are huge group of people. They're whether sitting in a working group, main committee, or different sub-community as an SME, subject matter expert. They're really driving behind. So I just want to show you, give you appreciation of some people behind, but not all. So believe me, there are hundreds of people behind to make it happen. And John is in one of the people in our engine room. Okay, I think I finished my 3 parts. I'll be happy to take some questions later on after John. Now, again, there's no prize, but there's also no penalty. Looking in your face, I probably can tell who got it all right. I think you all did very well. Thank you very much. And let me over to you, John. Yeah.
Can everyone hear me okay? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Very sort of similar to Billy, it was incredible being able to walk around some of the laboratories this morning. I'm the, say, you'll work out very quickly, I am not a technical expert in hydrogen. I was the kid walking around laboratories and I had to put my hands in my pockets so as to not touch everything. So yes, thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. As I say, very nice to speak after to Billy, because we get the technical, the clever stuff out of the way first, and I'm able to talk to you about the much more general what we do in this space. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who we are, what we do, how we put our work together. As I say, as Billy has already alluded to, our work internationally, and unfortunately, no apologies from me, a shameless plug on one of our key projects we call NextGen. So yes, the world of standards. So what are standards? Standards are published documents setting out specifications and procedures designed to ensure the products, services, and systems are safe, reliable, and consistently perform the way they were intended to. They establish a common language that defines quality and safety criteria. They are practical and set achievable goals based on sound industrial, scientific, and customer experience. We try to ensure that they are regularly reviewed and ensure that we keep pace with the advances of technology. As I say, from the screen here, we have found examples of standards going back to 1750 BC. I actually have on the next slide some of my favorites from this original list. My father-in-law is a tradie working in the building profession, so I was able to go through some of these with him, and these are the ones which made him laugh. Yeah. So as I say, yeah, hopefully we can all pick out a favorite in there. So Standards Australia, bringing it forward to modern day. Our story actually begins back in 1922. The first Australian standard was developed to govern the 6 million rivets that you find on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So every time that bridge is used, it is Australian standards keeping everybody safe. We are an independent, not-for-profit organisation recognised by the Australian government as the peak standards body in Australia, and obviously representing Australia at ISO and IEC level. Whilst I say I'm very happy to talk about our sort of traditional history, we do want to look forward and promote the growth of new industries to support the development of safe and secure environments to create market confidence in new and established technical fields such as circular economy, smart energy, and of course hydrogen. As I say, last year in October we turned 100 years old, and in celebrating this milestone, it's important to remember and recognise the contribution and efforts of our many members, contributors, and stakeholders. So yes, as I say, we've come a long way since 1750 BC. Standards are increasing in complexity. We have many standards that reach over 600 pages long, including some of our most popular standard is the wiring rules, which in its next iteration is only going to get more complex. In our recent Iconic Nation report, which is available on our website, our research shows that over the next 10 years, an estimated 4,000 new standards will be needed to strengthen Australia's economy, protect our nation from cyber attacks, mitigate the impact of natural disasters, and transition from traditional energy sources to renewables like hydrogen. A little bit of a shameless plug here, but today over 80% of world trade is affected by standards. We have a catalogue of 28,500 standards and technical publications. They cover things like child car seats, the energy efficiency of buildings which we're in now, the software of your smart devices and how they talk to each other, all governed by standards. So let's talk a little bit about the work that we actually do. We have 5,317 active committee members, covering a range of interest categories, including government, agencies and departments, manufacturers, consumer groups, unions and employment bodies, technical and professional organizations, certification bodies, regulators, and of course, academia. It's a really interesting time to be part of this world. Our guiding principles and framework to deliver these new standards come from our MOU with the Commonwealth. We have never had more interest from government in our work. We feel this is the perfect time for government and industry to work with us, not only to change and to manage the risks for the next decade, but also to seize the opportunity in this rapidly changing industry we see ourselves in. We have already invested very heavily in making standards easier to engage with, some of which I'll be able to talk about in a moment. Our achievements so far, including launching a new online proposal form, which is a critical document needed to kickstart any work that we undertake, including revisions, amendments, and international adoptions. This has seen fantastic feedback, and we are looking forward to rolling out with 2.0 version in the next month or so. We've also moved our public commenting and drafting of standards online via our Connect platform, which has seen a dramatic increase in the efficiency for both committee members and members of the public. Should anyone be interested in how to sort of take part in this, please do come and find me after or refer to our website. So this slide, I just wanted to sort of identify the boundaries of where standards sort of leave and where sort of policy and certification comes in. Standards form one part of the broader sort of conformance infrastructure. Standards Australia in itself develops voluntary standards. It is up to government and regulators to call up those standards into regulation. Very happy to say that this is often the case. And that's when they become binding. We also find standards being used in contracts between industry partners as well. So yes, as I say, we are not involved in the accreditation. We are not involved in the regulation. We bring experts together to identify the minimum levels of safety. So, how do we encourage participation? We have a number of ways for people to get involved. We are a member-based organisation. Our work programme is set by industry. Any member of the Australian public can submit a proposal to us, and there is a need for any identified need can be brought on to me. One of my primary roles at Standards Australia is to lead the team working on these proposals. It's therefore my job to represent those proposals and take them to our executive team with buy-in. So it's always really, really nice when proposals come through and they're not written in technical language. We then hand over these proposals to our technical committees. Now, under the technical committee, we often have, as I say, informal working groups made up of subject matter experts who may not necessarily be aligned with some of the key nominating organisations who are brought in to help create the content. But as I say, we are desperately trying to encourage more participation from key technical experts. So I'm really hoping that people will be able to identify some of those needs and highlight them to us. And then every standard that we release goes for 9 weeks of public comment. We really do want standards to be representative of industry, and it's a vital part of the standards development process that we allow all of our drafts to be completely visible for that period of 9 weeks. Every public comment that we receive has to be responded to at the committee level. So it really is a very critical part of the standards development process. So I'll take you through in a little more detail. So first off, when we receive that proposal, it comes through to me and my team. We work with that proponent to make sure that the need for the work and the scope of the work is tight enough so as to fully represent the worthwhile nature of the work. We then take that through to the executive at Standards Australia, who are given permission to do that by our board of directors. We then hand the project over to a committee who identify if a working group is needed. This is when we moved into the drafting stage. We have worked very hard to reduce the amount of time it takes to write a standard. In 2017, the average time was between 3 and 4 years. As of the end of last year, I'm very happy to say we have brought that down to 18 months. So an awful lot of investment, a lot have been invested in technology. And to be awfully honest, I need to call out the work of people like Billy on our committees who are able to dedicate their time to this endeavour. As I say, we then move on to the public commenting stage. So any standard that we release, as I say, has to go through that 9-week period of public comment. We try and make sure that there are no barriers to anybody being able to review our drafts. It's a very, very simple sign-up process. You need an account from our website. You then log straight in and can see every standard. You don't even need to tell us where your expertise are. And then finally, we move on to balloting. So after public comments have been resolved, it then the responsibility of the technical committee to ballot, having first confirmed their vote with their nominating organisation. A very quick point on the nominating organisations. Standards Australia do not appoint individuals primarily to committees. Moreover, we prefer to approach organisations with a vested interest who represent a constituency. We would much prefer people come to us having spoken to a constituency to make sure that there isn't any individual bias, or at least that is reduced as much as possible. And then finally, we hand over to our publication team, and we are continuing to increase the number of distribution channels we have, including our own standards store. We have agreements with some of our nominating organisations who have access to standards available to their members. And as I say, part of what we do in the background is try and make sure that the standard can be available to the right people in the right time, in the right format, be it in print or as we're seeing more and more in digital and mobile form. A little bit more on the ME93 committee. So this is a very, very new structure. In fact, the committee haven't been able to meet yet under this new structure. That actually takes place next week. This is the first time we've done this for any of our technical committees. And probably a side story as to the why we've done this first. I joined Standards Australia coming up to 2 years ago. Now, ME93 was one of the very first committees that was highlighted to me. Part of my role is to make sure that the people on the main committee level are able to work with us and for us. The Hydrogen Technologies Committee is probably one of the most prominent committees we have. And I think on my second day, I received 3 expressions of interest in joining the committee. The committee was already very sizable, so unfortunately I've developed a somewhat reputation for saying no an awful lot to anybody that wanted to join the committee. It makes it really difficult when we have sort of international meetings and I need to go out and reach out for sponsorship, because I'm now the guy that says no to everybody trying to ask them for sponsorship. But over the course of the next year, I received at least 1 expression of interest in joining the committee a week. This was unlike any other committee I look after. Of the 144 that I review, I've never received so much interest in ME93. So we needed to come up with a structure where I could start saying yes, and where we could start making sure that the people that wanted to take part in our standards work could do so. So for this reason, we have created the box on the right, the Hydrogen Standards Forum. So this is designed for people that want to stay up to date with the work that we're doing, to have the ability to influence work on a project level The former model would be where we would accept people onto the committee. They would decide to join a working group for one particular project, and then, quite frankly, they stayed on that working group regardless of how many projects were coming in. We would have working groups of up to 50 people with only 10 people attending meetings. So we've now decided to scrape that back to 5 or 6 of the key members, some of the names Billy presented earlier. So when a project becomes available, as I say, there are a number working on at the minute, we will reach into that standards forum to see if there's interest and expressions of interest in joining that individual project team. The working group is purposefully above that because this is where the majority of the work is done. This includes mirroring at international level, and the ME93 will have a much more strategic focus to identify some of the gaps that exist in the hydrogen space, and then to continue to ballot on the work that is done. So yeah, it's a really exciting new project for us, and we're hoping that it goes well, because it's already a model we've identified to expand to some of our other prominent committees. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about how we participate internationally. I do want to respect everybody's time, and I know we're coming up to the end, so I'll try and move these fairly quickly. It is always our preference to adopt international standards. So much of what we do in Australia is influenced by the rest of the world. We have the ability to become a hydrogen superpower. As Billy identified, we have the unique opportunity to be able to export to so much of the world, and because of that, there is very little point in writing Australian-only standards that could not be interpreted and used by the rest of the world. Interoperability is crucial to ensuring that global systems work, and that we have coherence across the world in areas such as technology, security, safety, and of course specifically hydrogen. So a little bit of the Australian context. As I say, international standards are always our first choice. The World Trade Organization's technical barriers to trade has 6 principles for the development of international standards. These are transparency, openness, impartiality and consensus, effectiveness, relevance, and coherence. And to make sure that any standard that we produce can be useful for the rest of the world. We are very lucky to have so many national committees mirror international committees as well. We have a specific international team to help with those mirroring work. As I say, I'm calling out some of the specific benefits of adopting, as I say, facilitating international trade, meet WTO obligations. The voicing of national interests is very important to us. Whilst I say we always prefer to adopt international standards, we do have the ability to adopt and modify where possible. I'll give you an example. An awful lot of the standards are written in Europe, where they usually experience only 1 season a day. Australia being a continent, we can have 4. It allows us to adopt an international standard where 90 to 95% of it we can use, but a standard may work very differently in sunny Sydney compared to working in the Pilbara, just as an example. So yes, we do strongly encourage these international standards, but with a very keen eye on making sure that it is relevant and has the right reach to Australia. And as I say, everything we do at Standards Australia has to be for the net benefit of the Australian community. We do work on the consensus model, and as I say, when we are going through any proposals that we receive, we want to make sure that there is an overall net benefit. We want to make sure that we have identified all the positive and all of the negatives for any work that we undertake as well. as I say, to deliver that benefit, and that includes the adoption of international standards. And I suppose, again, another bit of a shameless plug, the world is run by those who turn up. We cannot influence the outcome of standards development if we don't have a seat at the table. So yeah, we are constantly seeking as much help as we possibly can in terms of sort of resourcing, financially as well. We do have that ability as well. And I'm saying we are constantly calling people to arms, I suppose, but it's very important to recognize what we do currently have. In fact, I think in the last couple of weeks, it's now the full 300 members participating at ISO level, 85 observing. We have 23 chairs and 5 people in a governance position very closely, and they will be either Standards Australia's employees or members of the board, etc. And the IEC as well, obviously a smaller organisation, but much more sort of aligned with the electrotechnology space, a much sort of greater representation in terms of percentage as well. And again, 5 chairs and 6 people on the governance committees as well, and the management board. It's very important to recognise the work that is ongoing. As I say, very, very quickly, the levels of participation. We don't expect people to log in every day at 3 a.m. for a meeting taking place at a European level, as much as we appreciate those that do. We are able to join any new committee. We see benefit in doing so as an observer level, and if we are able to participate and provide that Australian voice on the international stage, Standards Australia would of course back that. Yeah, let's move pretty quick. Okay, so I realise we're coming up on time. As I say, I will run through this very, very quickly. We have a next gen program to try and encourage sort of more young professionals to join. The program itself is for, as I say, emerging technical experts, anywhere between 3 to 7 years, I suppose, in an industry, and the goal is to support the future of standards development. It is a 10-month program, completely free of charge. I'm actually one of the facilitators for that as well, talking about the work that engagement does and how we write proposals and the standards development process. There is, I think, yeah, I've got a little quick video. If I just click next, will that play, and then hopefully this works.
Are you an emerging industry or technical expert looking to take your career to the next level? Look no further than the Next Gen program. Designed with young professionals in mind, providing a unique opportunity to grow their skills and knowledge in the world of national and international standardisation.
The Next Gen program really gives us an entryway into standards development.
I'm already excited about standards and developing standards, so I jumped on the chance of becoming a member.
The background knowledge of standards really helps being an active committee member.
You'll get an in-depth look at standards, how they're created, their impact, and most importantly, how you can become involved with their development in the future.
The skills and knowledge of history that you learn through this program is like nothing else. And then you have the support of the Next Gen team to help you through. And the bonus is being that we get a mentor through the whole program.
But that's not all. Our interactive workshops focus on both professional and personal development, levelling up your skills and providing a unique opportunity to build relationships and expand your network right across Australia.
This program is fantastic as it's face-to-face and it's also Zoom as well. I found it very flexible. It's just so well run and I feel like you get so much out of it.
It taught me how personal branding is important in the modern industry and how we should work towards developing our own personal brand.
Places are limited. Please don't miss out on this amazing opportunity. Take that next step now and visit the Standards Australia website and search for Next Gen to apply.
So yes, applications are available now. They actually do close on Friday. So yeah, really sort of trying to push. So the program has been running since 2017. In that first year, I think we had around 10 applicants. Last year, that increased to 50. It's a truly amazing program. As a result of completing the program, you have the opportunity to join any committee for a period of 2 years. I'm very happy to say that there are currently 2 next-gen people on the ME93 committee. So it's obviously an area where we're seeing an awful lot of interest. So yeah, as I say, I appreciate we've come to time, so I might leave it there. But yeah, as I say, if there's anything else, do please feel free to reach out. And thank you very much for your time.
So thank you very much to John and Billy for your engaging and very relevant presentation.